Welcome to Just the Facts Special Edition. Yeah, I looked at him because I knew he was going to try to do digits. Like, what do I do for special edition? There isn't one. So special edition number one.
Special edition number one.
We might have some of these. There's a subject that we've been talking about, the two of us, and that would be trade appraisals. And there's a bit of a broken process, which is why we're having a special edition and giving it to you on this podcast form on Just the Facts. And so my question to you, Bob, and welcome today to our special edition here in the studio in Henderson, Nevada, which we love, right?
We do love.
We do love it here. And so as we're talking about the trade appraisal, there's some broken pieces to it. So let's talk about the broken pieces first.
Well, first of all, why it's important is because 7 out of 10 consumers today buying a vehicle have a trade-in. Right? 7 out of 10. So 70% of your future clients are going to have a trade-in. It's a number one defection point when putting a car deal together. It's where we lose them the most, right? So if you look at 7 out of 10 of your customers having a trade, and it's the number one point upon which you lose a car deal, and you multiply that with the lack of inventory today, right? Remember, trade-in is the best source of inventory. It matters. Improving the old proverbial look to book matters, right? How many do you look at? How many do you actually win? And remember, the only way to take a trade is to sell a car. So you're automatically helping sell cars. If you're trading for more, you're selling more. That's why it's critical.
So one of the things that we've been hearing is a customer will come in and they'll get a figure online because there's all kinds of stuff out there and we see it every day of we'll buy your car, right? So you see it on billboards. You see it on banners out in front of a dealership. You see it all over online, which is amazing because we've been talking about that for several months now, is tell the customer you're going to buy their car. Right. And so in that process, though, what consumers are starting to tell us is that they're getting different figures at the dealership than what they got online. Now, I think some of that goes into the condition of their vehicle.
Sure, that's how
they may not have told the truth about their vehicle. So I'm not saying you should always have that number, but what's a best practice there because now we're changing it up a little bit and seeing some stuff online and trying to make an evaluation to get the customer to come in. But what are some best practices there when the customer does come in and all of a sudden that number is different?
Well, it all depends on your goal, right? You should have a plan as to how you're actively seeking the inventory. Now, if it is strictly online and you're working with online processes, you just simply have to build in the caveat that this is subject to a physical appraisal, right? Some dealers are having consumers send photos in of the car so you can tell if there's body damage and that kind of stuff. That's up to you. There's varying degrees of success with that because, again, it depends on your personnel and who's handling the transaction. The challenge to that, and this is why it's just a thought, is that you're tightening up your ability to move the number if they gave you all those photos, if they gave you an accurate description, and then when you get there, you realize, you know what, something I missed, and now that's a challenge. So how far you take it in the beginning is up to you. There's lots of opinions on that. It's still freshly new, so there's, variances of opinion. It's the ability to communicate that matters more, not how you do it. It's who does it. It's the mindset of the person on the conversation. This is an inventory acquisition when they're online. It's not a trade-in car deal until they're at the dealership, unless you're trying to do the entire transaction online. So we want to caveat there first, right? There's two types of appraisals today. One is inventory acquisition. One is putting a car deal together. And they do matter and they are different.
No, that makes total sense. And so that answers that a little bit, but I think there's more to it and part of the process at the dealership.
100%.
And one of the things we said with Just the Facts with Industry Insights is that we were going to challenge you as well. And so those of you that are listening to us today on this special edition of Just the Facts, we want to make it clear we're going to challenge you on some of the processes that come into play, because the other thing that we're hearing is the customers coming in and they're being left alone for over an hour inside the dealership while their car is being appraised. They don't know what's happening. They're freaking out. There's no more donuts anymore, no more coffee because all that's been shut down. So what happens there in that process?
That's what we need to talk about today.
Yeah, and why are they being left alone, and what can we do to improve that? Should they be part of that process? Because in my opinion, I think the customers should.
Yeah, well, the process that's the most successful today is called an active trade appraisal, right? An active trade appraisal changes the old process. The old process was part of a 10-step process where you would have a salesperson fill out an appraisal form, get the information from the customer, grab the keys, go get the car appraised, leaving the customer alone. Now, truth be truth, we all know the truth. Salesman's out grabbing coffee, salesman's out having a cigarette, salesman's doing whatever the salesman's doing, and the customer sits there by themselves. Well, we already mentioned that this is the number one defection point on doing a car deal. If you are a customer and you visit a dealership, you're all prepared to buy a car, you found a car, you know you want to buy it, you know that this step is what stops you or allows you to buy the car. So you're anticipating a struggle, right? You don't want to not be able to get the car. You're finally at the dealership. Maybe you've been there for an hour and a half, and you know that depending on this figure allows you to buy it or not. That's why it's the highest defection point. Well, when you leave someone alone with those kinds of thoughts going through their head, 5 minutes turns into a half hour, it feels like. And when's the last time we were able to do an appraisal in 5 minutes, right? It doesn't happen. So the new process has the customer involved. So the customer literally helps the appraiser appraise the vehicle, and the salesperson's left out of it. Why? Because the last person you want trying to explain a trade evaluation is a salesperson, because the salesperson knows he's going to lose the car deal. So when you involve the customer, the second part of that, and probably more important, is to leave the salesperson out of it, right? Fast forward for a second before we go through the rest of the process. You're doing that step because when it comes to the figure, if the customer is left alone and the salesperson walked away and came back with a figure, the salesperson owns the figure. So the customer says, well, why are you giving me that figure? And the salesman's like, oh, well, because that's what Joe gave me. Well, go get me more from Joe. And that's what every car deal sounds like. But in the new process, if the customer's involved and the salesperson's not, when the customer goes, why are they giving me this for my car? The salesperson goes, I don't know, you were there. What? He doesn't own it. He doesn't have to defend the number. That's the first two steps of the process.
Well, before you go on in that, so I have a question about that. So if I'm a consumer, I'm out there, I'm part of the process, I'm doing a walk around. So, you know, we've been in the business for a while, so I do know what a silent walk around is
we're not promoting that.
Is to devalue that trade, right? And so in this new process that you're talking about is active, as I'm a consumer being active in that process. What about the things I did to it? What about the things that may have happened before? And what's that line between devaluating and getting the truth about what happened to that vehicle in the past?
Here's the difference, and I'm going to give you the why first. Here's the why first. If you spend all the time with the consumer downplaying their car, right? Devaluing their car, no matter what figure you come out with, they're going to anticipate it's too low. So what you do instead is let the customer sell you their car. You ask questions like, hey, can you tell me a little bit about your car? Sure seems like a nice car. Yeah, it's a nice car. Well, but I need tires. No, that's okay. Why would you buy tires? You're trading it in, aren't you? And it gives you the opportunity to promote the sale today. You know what? I want to fix that little dent either. I'm trading the car in. Why would I fix it? I don't blame you. And you turn it into you're doing business today. Of course you didn't put tires on the car. You're trading it in. Of course you didn't fix that. You're trading it in. Everyone has little dents and dings. We knew that. And when you take the onus off of the negative, now when that figure comes back, you literally, if the manager has to TO the deal, for example, right? The customer already met him because they were doing the appraisal together. And the manager can look at the customer and say, listen, we didn't knock you for all that stuff. We found all the money we could for you. In fact, Carfax says it's worth, that's why we're giving you this figure. And it makes sense. But if you spend the entire time saying, you know, picking at the scratch, put the quarter in the tire, if it hits the head, it needs tread, you know, all that kind of stuff, the customer's thinking you're going to lowball them on their car because you've been prepping them for that. But if you tell them just the opposite, the reverse happens. And the ownership of the number is partly owned by the consumer because the consumer was able to sell him the car. Now, this all sounds like sales techniques. We are a consumer company. So in no way are we telling you negotiating techniques, whatever. But this is a win-win, because according to the consumer, this is the worst part of the car deal. So by having them involved in it, having them take an active role of it, you take away all that built up anxiety that makes it miserable buying a car.
Yeah, and we have consumers that watch Just the Facts,
right? 100%.
And so they see it, and we're not hiding it, and we're not trying to show tricks and things to do. I mean, a consumer watching now, sell your car to the dealership, put value into it. If you want to clean it, clean it. If you don't. But it's your job to be an advocate for yourself in your car and presenting that to the dealership. And I think that's the piece that's missing there.
Exactly right.
Be involved. Make sure you're involved in the process. And those dealer partners out there that are listening to us today, let the customer be involved in that process too. So I know we kind of went away from your process there, but I thought that was important to really bring up.
That's the most important part, is having the consumer involved and not the salesperson, right? So when you do that, the process tells you that you reduce the mistrust. If a customer is helping the manager or the appraiser, whoever is looking at that car, there is no mistrust there. You're part of the equation, right? It does lessen the need for objection, because if I'm a consumer, I know that we did a job appraising the vehicle together, and this number is accurate. This number makes sense. This number is what, so the total process for active, the reason it's called active is because the consumer is actively involved in doing the process.
So you left at number 2, I think, or number 3. And so to pick it up on where you left off, or do you remember where you left off?
Of course I remember where I left off, but here's the deal. When the consumer's helping you, remember, they'll take all day with you. All of a sudden that 5 minutes isn't a half hour. It's 10, it's 15 minutes, because they're active, because they're busy, because they're not sitting there with bad thoughts going through their head. So any kind of reconditioning that you've discovered, you're talking to the consumer. Yeah, I understand I needed tires, whatever. Now, when you do your sales menu and you put on there minus $800 because it needs tires, the consumer understands where that figure is coming from. You're not just negotiating. It makes sense to the consumer. And the last part of it is make sure that the number you're using is something that the consumer can understand where it came from. Now, we work for Carfax. We have our history-based value tool. There's other tools out there. Whatever tool you use, make sure the consumer understands that you're not just picking that number out of the air. You're using this service. You're using this market research. You're using this evaluation tool. Make sure they understand you're using third-party tools to justify your pricing. Whether that's us or somebody else is up to them, but use something. There's a lot of good tools out there.
There are several good tools out there, and I like ours. I think ours is a great tool to be able to account for all of that information. But as always, we don't have a commercial here.
Yeah.
If you want more information, you can figure that out with your Carfax rep. But maybe in summary, just kind of just list those. So someone out there is very analytical and is like, okay, you guys went all over the place here on this. You didn't really, but maybe just bullet points. Like what is that process in your mind on the active appraisal?
The most important one is to involve the customer and leave your salesperson out of it. So simply have your salesperson introduce the customer to the appraiser, and the appraiser and the customer walk away and evaluate the vehicle while the salesman is left behind, right? That is the most important fact. Second is, when you're doing the appraisal, do not do a silent walk around. Do not keep putting the customer's car down. This is not an opportunity to devalue the trade. You don't want to devalue the trade. You want a partnership with the consumer to reach an agreeable figure based on logic and based on using some tools. So that way the consumer has a part of the experience. That way the consumer understands the number, and it's much more manageable emotionally for the consumer. Remember, this is the number one defection point. This is the part the consumer hates the most. So those are the two key things. Keep the customer involved, leave the salesperson out of it, and do not devalue the trade while you're walking around. Let the customer sell you their car.
Man, I thought you had like 7.
No.
You just have 2 easy ones.
It's always easier
than it is super easy. I mean, we had one on sales process and Just the Facts, and that was like 3, and now this one's only 2.
It's simpler than it is complicated.
I think the next subject is going to be 1 step, right? That we'll have. Well, we thank you guys for tuning in to this podcast of Just the Facts and our special edition. And you never know, we might bring one special edition. If you got things you want us to talk about, please let us know. JustTheFacts@gmail.com. See you then.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.